The smell of smoke still clung to Maria Santos, even though the fire had been 3 months ago. She sat in the Family Feud waiting area wearing the only dress she owned now, a simple blue garment donated by the Red Cross. Her hands trembled slightly as she touched the small silver cross around her neck, the only thing that had survived the flames. "You ready for this?" her cousin Elena asked softly. Maria nodded, though her eyes held the hollow look of someone who had lost more than possessions. She had lost her history, her identity, every physical reminder of who she used to be. The Santos family from Phoenix had been selected after Elena submitted their application. It was supposed to be a distraction, something to help Maria rebuild not just her home, but her spirit. The prize money could help her start over in ways charity couldn't. Steve Harvey's voice echoed through the studio as the cameras prepared to roll. The energy was infectious, as always, designed to make contestants forget their troubles for a few precious hours. But Maria carried the kind of pain that even television magic couldn't erase. She wore a borrowed watch that didn't fit quite right. Everything about her life felt borrowed now, temporary, like she was living in someone else's existence. The fire had taken her house, her belongings, and something deeper that she couldn't name. The game began with standard energy. The Santos family faced the Mitchell family from Colorado in what should have been a celebration of competition and fun. Steve worked his magic, drawing laughs and creating those moments of connection that made the show special. Maria stood at the far end of her family's podium. She tried to smile when the cameras focused on her, but the expression felt foreign on her face. Smiling had become something she had to remember to do, like breathing consciously. "Survey says," Steve announced as the first round progressed. The Santos family was doing well, their answers lighting up the board with encouraging frequency. Elena kept glancing at Maria, checking for signs that this was helping rather than overwhelming her. The studio lights were warm and bright. For most contestants, they represented excitement and possibility. For Maria, they reminded her of different lights, orange and destructive, that had changed everything in a single night. During a commercial break, Steve worked the audience as he always did. His natural charisma filled the studio, making strangers feel like family. He noticed Maria immediately, standing quietly while celebration happened around her. There was something in her posture that caught his attention, the way she held herself carefully, as if sudden movements might break something fragile inside her. Steve had learned to read people over decades of television, and Maria was carrying invisible weight. "You doing okay over there?" Steve asked during the break, walking toward the Santos family podium. Maria managed a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just grateful to be here," she replied, her voice carrying sincerity mixed with sadness. Elena stepped closer to her cousin protectively. "She's been so strong through everything," she said, but her tone carried worry that Steve immediately recognized. Something significant wasn't being said here. The cameras came back on. Steve returned to his position, but his eyes kept drifting to Maria throughout the next round. Her family was winning, but she seemed disconnected from their success, present but not fully there. The fast money round arrived. Elena went first and scored 162 points. The family needed only 38 more points to win the $20,000, money that could transform Maria's situation completely. Maria stepped up to the podium. Her family cheered behind her, but she barely registered their encouragement. The bright lights felt intense, the studio audience vast, the pressure mounting in ways that had nothing to do with the game. "All right, Maria," Steve said, his voice carrying its usual warmth. "You need 38 points to win $20,000 for your family. You ready?" She nodded, gripping the podium with hands that had learned to hold on to whatever remained stable. The questions began with familiar rhythm. "Name something people do when they're cold." "Put on jackets," Maria answered automatically. "Name something you might find in a kitchen." "Dishes." "Name something families do together during holidays." "Cook dinner." "Name something people save for emergencies." Maria hesitated for just a moment. The word photos formed in her mind, but it brought with it a wave of loss so profound she almost couldn't breathe. Those were gone now, all of them. Money, she said quietly. The safest answer she could manage. Final question, Maria. Name something fire can't destroy. The question hit the studio like a physical force. Maria's face went completely white. Her hands began shaking visibly as she stared at Steve, the carefully maintained composure she'd built over 3 months beginning to crack. The studio waited. Her family waited. But Maria couldn't speak because the question had reached into the deepest part of her grief and torn it open. Fire had destroyed everything she thought was permanent. Everything she thought defined her. Maria started, then stopped. The familiar signs of panic began rising in her chest. The bright lights suddenly felt like flames. The audience, like witnesses to destruction she couldn't escape even here. I don't know anymore, she whispered, so quietly the microphones barely picked it up. But the cameras caught everything. The way her face crumbled, the tears that started flowing, the way she gripped the podium like it was the only solid thing in a world that could burn. Steve Harvey had hosted thousands of episodes. He'd seen contestants struggle with difficult questions, seen them get emotional, seen them freeze under pressure. But this was different. This wasn't about the game anymore. He set down his cards and walked toward Maria. Not the measured walk of a television host, maintaining show pace, but the immediate response of a human being recognizing someone in crisis. The studio fell silent as all protocols were abandoned. Maria, Steve said softly, reaching the podium, talk to me. What happened? Behind the scenes, Maria made a decision that would change everything. She looked up at Steve, tears streaming down her face, and let the dam break completely. The fire took everything, she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. Every photo of my parents who died 5 years ago. Every letter my grandmother wrote me. Every baby picture. Every birthday. Every Christmas morning. The words poured out like they'd been waiting months to be spoken. 28 years of memories, and I don't have proof any of it happened. I don't have anything left of who I used to be. The studio was completely silent. Steve Harvey, who had built a career on quick responses and perfect timing, found himself in territory no game show had ever prepared him for. This wasn't entertainment, this was human devastation laid bare. Maria, Steve said, his voice stripped of all performance. Can I ask you something? She nodded, wiping her face with trembling hands. What was in those photos that made them so important? Maria looked toward her family, then back at Steve. Love, she said simply. They were proof that I was loved, that I existed, that my life mattered to someone. The honesty in her answer was devastating. Elena was crying now, standing at the family podium with tears of recognition. She had watched her cousin struggle with this exact question for months, trying to understand how identity could be tied to objects that no longer existed. Steve looked at Elena, then back at Maria. In that moment, he understood something profound about the difference between losing things and losing proof of your existence. And without the photos? He asked gently. I feel like I'm disappearing too, Maria replied. Like if there's no evidence I was loved, maybe I never really was. The vulnerability in her voice connected with everyone in the studio who had ever feared being forgotten. Steve Harvey had made people laugh for decades. But in this moment, he learned something about the difference between entertaining people and helping them remember who they are. He did something unprecedented in television history. He walked around the podium and gently took Maria's hands in his. Maria, I want you to look at me, he said. Look right into my eyes and tell me what you see. She looked up, confusion mixing with tears. I see someone who cares, she whispered. Good, Steve replied. Now look at your family. Look at Elena. What do you see there? Maria turned toward her cousin, who was nodding encouragingly. Love, Maria said, her voice slightly stronger. That's right, Steve continued. Now look at this audience. 300 people who didn't know you existed 5 minutes ago. What do they look like now? Maria glanced around the studio. Every face was focused on her with expressions of compassion and recognition. People were wiping their eyes, leaning forward, completely invested in her story. "They look like they care about what happens to me," she said with surprise. "Maria," Steve said, his voice carrying absolute conviction. "Fire can't destroy love. It can't destroy the impact you had on people. It can't destroy the memories in their hearts. All those photos, they were just copies of something much more permanent." But Steve wasn't finished. He turned to address the entire studio. "Ladies and gentlemen, Maria just taught us something important. She showed us the difference between having proof of love and having love itself." His voice carried across the studio with the weight of recognition. Those photos didn't create the love. They just reminded her it existed. But look around this room right now. Look at how much love is here for someone whose story we just heard. The audience began to respond, not with applause, but with something deeper. People were standing, not because they were prompted to, but because they couldn't remain seated in the face of such raw honesty. "You see, Maria," Steve continued, "fire might have taken your photos, but it can't take you. It can't take the love that's in Elena's heart. It can't take the memories your friends carry. It can't take the difference you've made in people's lives." Maria was sobbing now, but the tears felt different. They weren't just tears of loss anymore. They were tears of recognition, of understanding something she'd been too close to grief to see clearly. "But I have nothing left," she whispered. "That's where you're wrong," Steve replied firmly. "You have everything that matters. You have people who love you. You have a story that just touched 300 strangers. You have a cousin who brought you here because she believes in your future." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. Without explanation, he dialed a number while the cameras continued rolling. The conversation was brief, conducted in whispers that only Maria could hear. When he finished, he looked back at her with something approaching joy. "Maria, I just called some friends of mine, people who specialize in helping families rebuild after disasters. We're going to make sure you get more than just a house back." The Mitchell family, who had been watching this unfold from their podium, abandoned their competitive position entirely. They walked across the stage and surrounded Maria, their opponents becoming her support system in a matter of minutes. "You know what?" Steve announced to the studio. "Both families win today. Because today we learned something more valuable than any prize money could buy." He looked directly into the main camera. "We learned that fire can't destroy love. It can't destroy identity. It can't destroy the bonds between people who choose to see each other and care about each other's stories." The audience erupted, not in the programmed applause of a television taping, but in genuine recognition of truth they had just witnessed. Maria stood surrounded by strangers who had become family, held up by love she hadn't known existed. But the most powerful moment was yet to come. Steve removed his suit jacket, the one he wore for every taping, and gently placed it around Maria's shoulders. "This jacket has been with me through every show," he said. "It's seen families win and lose, laugh and cry. But today, it's going to wrap around someone who just reminded us what really can't be destroyed." The jacket was warm and substantial, making Maria feel protected in a way she hadn't experienced since before the fire. As the cameras stopped rolling and the audience began to file out, something unprecedented happened again. People didn't leave immediately. They approached Maria one by one, sharing their own stories of loss, of rebuilding, of discovering that identity runs deeper than possessions. A woman had lost everything in a hurricane. A man had watched his childhood home demolished. A teenager whose family had fled war with nothing but each other. Each person who spoke to Maria added another thread to a tapestry of resilience she hadn't known existed. Steve stayed with her through it all. This wasn't publicity or show business. This was community forming in real time, proof that shared vulnerability creates stronger bonds than shared success ever could. The episode aired 8 weeks later, exactly as it had been filmed. No editing to soften Maria's breakdown. No removing of the hard truths she had spoken. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Fire departments across the country reported increased donations to victim relief funds. Photo restoration services offered free help to disaster survivors. But most importantly, families began having conversations about what really couldn't be destroyed. Maria became an advocate for disaster survivors, speaking about the invisible losses that insurance doesn't cover. She appeared on Steve's talk show 6 months later, not as someone still grieving what was lost, but as someone who had found what remained. The business card Steve had given her led to resources she hadn't known existed. Counseling that helped her separate identity from possessions. Support groups where she met others rebuilding not just homes but hope. Steve's jacket became a symbol she shared with other survivors. She wore it to her first speaking engagement, where she talked to a room full of disaster victims about the difference between losing everything and losing what matters. The house she eventually built was smaller than the one that burned, but it was filled with new photos, new memories, new evidence of love that fire had never touched. The walls held pictures of the day she met Steve, of speaking engagements, of new friendships formed in vulnerability. A year later, Maria had an answer to Steve's question. Fire couldn't destroy love, hope, resilience, or the capacity to begin again. It couldn't destroy the connections between people who choose to see each other's pain and respond with compassion. She learned that losing physical proof of your past doesn't erase the impact you've had on others. That being forgotten isn't about missing photos, it's about missing connections. And connections could be rebuilt, sometimes stronger than before. Today, Maria works with the Red Cross, helping families navigate not just the practical aspects of disaster recovery, but the emotional rebuilding that comes after. She tells them about the day she learned that fire destroys things, not people. Steve Harvey still keeps a photo from that day in his dressing room. Not a professional shot, but a candid moment of Maria surrounded by strangers who had become family. It reminds him that sometimes the most important television happens when people tell the truth about loss. The studio audience from that day maintains an informal network that continues to this day. They check on each other during difficult times, offer support during rebuilds, and prove that witnessing someone's vulnerability creates lasting responsibility for their healing. Maria's story proves that disaster doesn't just destroy, it reveals what truly matters, who really cares, and what actually can't be burned. Sometimes the most important discovery happens in the ashes of everything you thought you needed, because love doesn't live in photographs. It lives in the hearts of people who remember you, choose you, and stand with you when everything else has turned to smoke. And that kind of love, that kind of proof, fire can never touch.